Hello and welcome to Sevier Strategy, your automotive podcast. I'm your host, John Sevier.
And I am your co-host, Sarah Moore.
And I am incredibly excited to get behind the desk again and, have the opportunity to talk with all of our listeners. We've taken a little bit of a break. The reason for that is we want to make sure if we are doing a podcast or any kind of YouTube video that we always follow our principle of delivering solid information and good strategy that you can take away from this podcast and implement into your dealership. And if I can achieve that and make sure that if you're listening in, you walk away with something, I'm going to make sure that we aren't shooting a podcast because I don't want to waste your time. So without further ado, I'm really, really excited. We got a heavy hitter here to kick things back off. I'm joined by the wonderful Jeff Bounds. How are you today, Jeff?
I'm doing fantastic, John. I'm super happy to have the opportunity to be on your show, brother.
So I've known Jeff for a little bit of time. I followed Jeff's career. We've definitely, when nerds collide, you tend to stick together. And I call myself a nerd. I'm a self-proclaimed nerd, so I'm good with that. Sorry if I just labeled you there, Jeff, but I definitely have a ton of respect for you. I know you're extremely knowledgeable in the space. And, just over the past couple of years that I've known you, you've just taken step up. So I know where you're currently at, but if you could just tell everybody a little bit about yourself and where you're at today.
Yeah, for sure. Today I'm the head of automotive with Grant Cardone down here in Miami, Florida. Actually been in the automotive industry now for a little over 25 years. It's actually really interesting, my journey. I started out in retail out of college. I was a college baseball player with the aspirations of going professional. When that dream ended, I had to figure out what I was going to do with my life. So at that time, I actually looked into the newspaper. I'm kind of dating myself a little bit here. And I saw an ad that said, generate $100,000 as a car sales professional. And I thought that sounded fantastic to it. So I took a swing at that. And I quickly realized I had no idea what I was talking about. I mean, I was awful at sales. So like anybody would do that tries to be better, I went out and picked up some books. At that time, it was Borders Bookstore, which is no longer in existence. But I went out there, picked up some books and tried to figure it out. And, I picked up books from like Joe Girard, who at that time was like, sold like 1 million cars a year or whatever he did. And some other people out there trying to learn how to be better. And then I ran into this guy named Grant Cardone, and he literally like changed my life. Not just, professionally, but personally, my mindset, my attitude every single day. And in following his principles, it's really helped catapult my career. I've spent 20 years in retail, got out of the retail industry, went into the vendor space. Nobody wanted to hire me. They thought I was just a car guy, and ended up getting an opportunity at that time with Dominion Dealer Solutions. My first year there, I was Rookie of the Year. And then the following years, I became Salesperson of the Year out of a team of 25 salespeople.
Nice.
Had some great opportunities there. And after that journey ended, I went into the telephony space and realizing how important phones are in the dealership. For the past 2.5 years, I've listened to hundreds and hundreds of phone calls inside of dealerships. And I've realized that training is something that's essential. And it's really no different than the way it was when I started in the 90s. Obviously the tech looks a lot different, but, salespeople still struggle on the phone. So I actually have known Grant for quite a while. Jared, who's the president of Cardone Enterprises here, he and I have been doing a dance for like 5 to 6 years, trying to put together something that made sense for me to come down here and join the team. So I'm thrilled to be here and thrilled to be on the show today.
Well, we are very pleased to have you. I know out of the conversations, when I do get time, I know you're a busy man these days, to actually speak to you. I always walk away from those phone calls with actionable items or new information that you shared with me, which, being greedy here, that's one of the reasons that we created this podcast, is to share that information and everything. But I definitely consider you a phone expert as well as, training. And I'm going to focus a little bit more on the training side because more inquisitive about that today. So, to kind of go down that path, one of the questions I have for you is, we go into these other dealerships. Sarah talks to these other dealerships with the company that we have, and I join in those conversations as well. And as we talk to these dealers, something that comes up constantly is training and training their sales managers, their sales staff, F&I department, everybody that they can. And the big question that comes back is training worth it? The training can be expensive. Training can be inexpensive. But, are my salespeople really going to listen? Are they going to retain it? Is it
Right.
valuable? And that's the big question that we get. And, I'd love to hear your answer on that of, is training really worth it? Or when does it become worth it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a great topic. And, what I would say is I think the majority of people, not just in the automotive industry, but in general, they think really small, right? I mean, the industry in the past, 5 or 6 years has been exploding. Dealers have been performing at a pretty high level and generating some pretty solid results. But, where's the lid at? How many deals are you truly missing? And when people talk about training, and if anybody says to me, like, hey, it's too expensive, I can't afford it, usually what I'll tell them is, I was like, you got to adjust your think, because the reality is you are losing $50, $60, $70,000 every single month through lack of proper engagement with your people and process. So if you look at an investment in a training platform versus the amount of money that you're losing every single month, then it kind of changes the conversation a little bit. But in all fairness, training itself, in the past, and I remember even when Grant got started in the industry, he was, doing city to city to city, doing all these workshops or what have you. And, studies have come out and found that, 90 days after visiting a seminar, the individuals at the highest point are only retaining about 12 to 13% of information.
So
So
wait a second.
if you're going to get yourself entrenched in a training culture, it has to be every single day. You got to keep your game tight. It's like even if you go on vacation, right? It's like when you come back, you might be a little rusty, but every single day you got to get yourself in there, because you got to get to the point where you can predict. And, you and I were talking a little bit the other day about in training in general and just in automotive, it's like, are you a professional or are you an amateur? Is this something that's a hobby for you? You show up at the dealership at 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning, and you just, let whatever way the wind blows, put you in that direction? Or do you have a plan of attack? That's what training is going to do for you. I mean, around here, everything we do is 10X, because people dramatically underestimate what it takes them to get where they need to be. And it has to be training every single day. And I've done it myself. I'm living proof. I mean, as a young man, I became really obsessed with learning as much as I can. And you were mentioning earlier about being a nerd, right? You could be a nerd around tech, or you could be a nerd around like reading, right? I mean, I read like 4 to 5 books a month. I'm on audio programs. I've probably invested over $50,000 on myself in personal self-development. So that's what training's about for me.
And real quick, because I know Sarah had a good question for you that I want to get to. But before I do, just because I'm a numbers guy, jumping back here, correct me if I'm wrong. 90 days. So within that 90-day time frame, when they go back, they're only retaining 12 to 13%. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Wow. And when you think about that, and sometimes the money that's associated with these conferences, don't get me wrong, we all have a good time when we go out there. It's great to network and meet people that are very like-minded and in the industry. That's always a huge plus. But you should be going there to learn and grow, or to, find out the newest tech or vendor that you want to look at signing on with. But if I'm going there trying to learn and I'm only walking away with a retention of 12 to 13%, and I'm spending, thousands of dollars for the travel, for the hotel, for the ticket to the event, depending on which event it is, that's a lot of money for one individual. So when you said the constant training, right, the daily training, the weekly training, and staying on that, what do you see in return with that? Where does that 12 to 13% go as far as retention is concerned? I mean, I wouldn't imagine it's
then
100.
You look at a 75 to 80% swing. And the reason being, and I want to go back to one of the things you were just talking about here, I am a firm proponent. You need to get out there. You need to go to conferences. You need to spend the money. I mean, just the networking opportunities themselves are well worth the opportunity to get out there. But I think it has to be, I'm a believer in a hybrid approach, meaning that I think, workshops are important, boot camps are important, events are important. But when you leave there, right, you're pumped up. When you get back home and you're in front of your family, you're in front of your friends, you're in front of all the people that are negative in your life, they kind of bring you down because that mindset leaves the room. But if you get a vehicle where you can actually train every single day, like for me personally, like I wake up every single day at 5:30. From 5:30 to 6:15, I train. So I use that time for training. And then 45 minutes before I go to bed, I train again. Why? Because I want to keep my game sharp. I want to keep it tight. So why does it go to 75 to 80%? Because of the fact that you can funnel where the impediments are in the training process. Because training in itself, it's kind of like drinking through a fire hose for a salesperson. Because John, if you and I lined up, let's say 15 of your salespeople, every single one of them is going to have their own strengths and their own impediments. If you're not able to isolate where the impediments are, how can you create sustainable change? That's the problem with training. That's why I feel like training doesn't work. Training sucks, this, that, and everything else. You got to point the salespeople in the right direction to get them to move ahead.
I would agree with that. And thanks for sharing that, Jeff. I wanted to touch on that before we went forward.
Yeah, and I think that, between the three of us, we've had that experience professionally where we've been on the sales floor in some way and at the dealership setting. And you can see the managers and their timeline through the day. They're getting pulled in different directions. So it's very hard for them to find, some time to step away and implement training, especially on a daily basis. So when you get people who just say, I don't think I have time for it, or what do you suggest to people who need some help in rearranging their schedule to
sure.
make
Another
training a
fantastic
priority
question. I
on their
mean,
schedule?
really at the end of the day, I think in life, one of the things I learned is if you want to move ahead, what are you prepared to give up, right? Are you watching, Breaking Bad on Netflix or whatever the current show is? Are you, watching
show.
TV? Or are you watching the game or whatever? Those things are great. And believe me, there's a time for that in my life as well, but those don't pay the bills. So I think that you have to chunk it down to make the time. And when people say, I don't have time, it's because it's not important to you, right? But if you create that daily deal, and what we recommend here is 12 to 15 minutes of training every single day. And when you do the math on that and the multiplication and how that expands, that helps the person to grow. I think, Malcolm Gladwell was the one that said that it takes 10,000 hours to become a master. But on the other side, it's got to be inspired inside of yourself to have the proper goals to want to get there. So when people say, I don't have time for training, this and that, I guarantee you, if I said, let me see your goals, they don't have any goals written down. Because if you have goals written down, you need to create a vehicle to get where you want to be.
I agree. You definitely have to sacrifice in some ways, and especially when you're going to, those conferences and you're learning best practices and things like that. When you come and you have that attitude and you're hyped up, like you said, and you want to make those changes, it's really about when you get back and keeping that motivation and finding ways to implement and use and suggest and bring training to your dealership setting.
Yeah. So I know I follow you as well on LinkedIn, Jeff, and for all of our listeners, I will make sure that I put Jeff's contact information so you can get a hold of him, because I definitely recommend the follow or the connection with him. But you recently just put out an article about the impact of not training your sales staff, right? And what that can do to your dealership. For our listeners who haven't had the chance to read it or not sure, if they've clicked on that article, tell us a little bit about that. Because I know I got to take
the reason that I wrote the article is because what I find is most people, they have awareness that they have a challenge, but it's in their subconscious mind, right? It's like, one of the questions I always ask, dealers or automotive, executives is, I say just with us talking, would you say it's fair to admit that at least 8% of your sales are lost every single month through the lack of proper process and engagement with your people? And I kid you not, every single one of them goes, that's not even close.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I'm with you. I understand. What do you think the number is? Right? And that's, sales 101. You get the person to actually buy in, and they're the one that's committing to a number. Most of them, people in car industry, oh, it's 20%. Great. So let me ask you this question. What is your average, PVR, gross profit, round trip on a deal that you have at your dealership? So, it's $2,500 a copy. So do the math. A dealership that sells 200 cars a month, just because it's not in their level of awareness, and this goes back to our first question, in training's expensive, right? So 200 cars a month, they average $2,500 a copy. You're talking about 40 car deals every single month. They go out the front door because you're not paying attention to them. And it's $100,000 a month and $1.2 million a year. That gets people's attention.
Yeah, that's a lot of money.
I mean, look, man, everybody has bad
And
days,
another aspect,
right? I mean, everybody wakes up, maybe you have a fight with your spouse, or, your kid gets in trouble. Or I just had a friend the other day where woke up and his kid was like using his wife's makeup and writing all over the wall, right? So you get distracted. So it's like the daily,
Mm-hmm.
so the daily
training
gets you kind of locked back in. Now, I'm really fortunate because the culture here is, everything every day is 10x. We have a morning meeting every single day at 9:05 to review what happened from the previous day and talk about our mission and why we're here. And if you don't do that, it's very easy to go off in a different direction and be distracted, and you're not giving your best that day. So in a dealership, John, it's like, it happens every single day, man. People are disengaged.
Yeah, and I think through conversation in that training, I think you find that disengagement too, which a lot of people don't talk about. If you're there going through training together and you're discussing it and you're encouraging everybody to partake in whatever training that you're currently utilizing.
Do you know why people become disengaged?
You see the people. I hear the statistic with why people leave jobs is primarily because of their, manager or boss. As far as disengagement, I would imagine it's a culture.
The key component of why somebody wouldn't like to sell cars at a dealership, wouldn't like showing up to work, or not really being, feeling it that day, is because they don't know what they're doing, right? It's like in life, when you know what you're doing, you get a confidence, you get a swagger, you get an attitude. So when you go every single day, you can predict what's going to happen, and you create this success. I remember, again, when I first started in the car business, and, I sold one of my first deals and I got a $200 spiff. I thought I was a millionaire, right? And that gave me the initiative and the hunger to say, how much more is out there? Okay, I did this once and this worked. Let me try to find out what I was doing, so I become unconsciously competent of what I need to do every single day. So, just like driving a car.
So I'm going to touch on that with a personal story that I haven't shared with a lot of people. It's something that, I found really interesting. So we sent out, we worked on a training program with our staff, and I know I've talked to you about that before. We sent out a survey once we implemented the certification training that we put into the BDC. So we send out a survey. It's an anonymous survey to our staff. And at the very last question, I put 4 topics on there, and I asked them to rank them 1, 2, 3, and 4 in order of importance to them. And those options were, what are you most excited about out of this training program or this certification that we're going to do? And the options were clear expectations, like recognition and accountability, right? So rewards there, the money, because their pay is tied to training. That's how much we believe in it, so their pay is tied to it. So money, and the other one was just, learning something new, right? Just bettering ourselves. the number one answer, and I thought it was going to be money. I'll just be honest with you. I
Yeah.
thought, hey, that's going to be the number one motivator here. The number one was clear expectations. And I think that aligns very closely to what you're saying is, in not every aspect. I mean, you can train any kind of job, right? Not just sales, but sales, the flip side of this, you can have a salesperson that sells 10 cars and feels like $1 million and then lets off that gas a little bit because they haven't set that bar very high for them, or maybe they don't have that level of motivation
Right.
of how to get to
Right.
the next level of 20 cars instead of 10. So we set those clear expectations. And I know that has nothing right now to do with training, but I think it's our job as management to facilitate. Once I know what I should be doing and how well I should be performing, I want to
Yeah.
know as that employee is how do I get there? How do I achieve that level that you're setting for me? Because I want to succeed. I haven't hired a single person that has come
Right.
in yet that doesn't want to do well. I mean, otherwise you're probably not hiring them anyways, but they do want to do well, and you can demotivate them very quickly by not investing in them as an employee through a couple of different ways. And that's why I said culture. But it's so important that we have to give them the tools and the resources once we set those clear expectations of how to achieve that goal. How do I get there? What do I need to do in order to achieve whatever goal is set by your
Totally agree,
manager?
man. I mean, look, it's most of us don't have the luxury of coming from a family where we were taught at a very early age, about setting goals, about the opportunity to create income and this and that and everything else. And I mean, even in my most recent role before I came here, I was the VP of sales of a call tracking company, and I had 8 people on my team. And I consider myself to be pretty well versed in regards to the sales process and training and everything else. But there's a bandwidth issue, right? It's like you can't be all places at all times, and you can't, give the attention that you need to all of your team. So that's why a vehicle that's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, that can be accessed through smartphone, tablet, or computer is in their hand. But the power and the beauty of it, and another reason why people get disengaged on training, is because they can't measure it. There's no metrics. So you got to have reporting, you got to have accountability in there. And then again, once they see that initial success, that's what just, sets them off, to explode in the opportunity for their career. And they start to believe in themselves, right? Because I think you would agree that you got to bet on yourself that you can get where you need to be, but you got to set goals that are like unattainable, right? That's 10x goals, something that, hey, if you sold, 10 cars a month, see if you could sell 30, see if you could sell 20, constantly raise the bar, set a number for yourself that's almost unattainable. And even if you miss the target, you're still going to be happy with the result.
Absolutely.
Right. And one of the last things that we kind of wanted to discuss, and especially myself, just kind of overall how interesting it is how far training has come in a short period of time. I remember a lot of training just being face to face and really just going over like, excuse me, role play and script reading and things like that. And now we're seeing more of like e-learnings and learning management systems. Can you kind of describe or tell a little bit of the benefit to that and where
Yeah,
you
for
see
sure. I
training
mean, look,
going in
I
the future?
remember, in the internet when there was like, I think it was like what, AOL, and I can't remember what the other, it was like net something. I can't remember when it first came out. You were doing, there you go. When you were doing like the
Netscape.
dial up, and you would try to watch a video and it would keep buffering and this and that and everything else. And then obviously with the, with YouTube coming into the space and exploding like they have, I mean, it's taken training to a different level, right? So it's like, when I can pick up my iPhone and have accessibility, anytime that I need it, I mean, that's powerful because it can't always be in an organized structure. So, if I'm out on the lot, I start running into objections and,
Right.
there's only like 5 or 6 real objections. When I run into that, I can go back and say, hey, I struggled on the price objection. How do I overcome it? And it just gives, the salespeople a vehicle to utilize it to solve a problem. It's like anything else. I mean, whether it's training, phone tracking, internet leads, whatever, you're trying to solve a problem, but you got to give the end user a vehicle and a pathway to get there. So I see training, moving forward. I mean, everything is going virtual. To John, to your point earlier, I mean, it's expensive to travel, man. I mean, you got to pay for the hotel, you got to pay for the Uber, you got to pay for the flight, you got to pay for your food. I mean, you're investing a lot of money and time to get there. So if you have the vehicle to be able to access it whenever you want, and something else that I want to highlight is people learn in 3 different ways. A person's either auditory, visual, or kinesthetic in their learning style. I'm a very visual person, right? I also suffer with extreme ADD, ADHD, like most people do in the car business, right? So it's like, for me, I'll have to replay a video over and over and over again. Or if I watch it 4 or 5 times, each time I watch that video, I'm picking up different content every single time. But I have the pathway to be able to go back and revisit what was taught. Whereas in the future, I mean, if you're in a seminar and you miss it, it goes like that. And look, you missed it. But, with the new digital world, I mean, everything's at your fingertips to be able to access whenever you want it.
I agree. We kind of do a little bit of that for training purposes when we go over things in a large group and we incorporate, different learning tools virtually for them
Yeah.
to use in the classroom per se. But just having something that they can refer back to, and be like, hey, we went over this in training. This is something I need a clarification on or something I'm trying to implement right now. Let me go back to that video or that thing that we have stored, and it's definitely been beneficial for some of the people that we've had taking leads. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll tell you something else that's really interesting as well. Like, I guess a tip that I'll throw out there is, Grant wrote a book called Be Obsessed or Be Average. And a lot of people are like, well, what is he writing about this book? But it's like, for me, when I go to, like, let's say I'm going to read the 10X rule. And if none of you on this call have read the 10X rule, I strongly recommend it. It's a life-changing book, right? So when I picked up the 10X rule, I initially bought it, in book format, and I started to read through the book. Then I went out and got the Audible version. So I'm reading the book, then I'm listening to it, and then it's hitting both of those sides of my learning capacity, the visual side and the auditory side, and then you tie it all together and your retention goes through the roof.
No, I agree. I think coupling that both together is huge, and I think that's a piece that people miss. When they think about training, they think there's a one size fits all, and
Right.
this is the only type of training you can do. This is the only type of training to be successful, and that, of course, is not the case. And I think you make a really good point there. But for the sake of time, for our listeners, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this. And I encourage you to check us out on YouTube as well. You'll be able to see Jeff in the wonderful Miami, Florida, of where he's located. But Jeff, before I kind of depart here, I'm really excited about a venture that you're starting as well, because I think it's something our listeners can benefit from, and that's really what we're about. And just share with us what you got going on Fridays coming up.
Yeah, so we're going to be launching the inaugural session of 10X Automotive Weekly. So that's going to be every single Friday at 10 a.m. It'll be on YouTube. It'll be on Facebook. It'll be on social media, and also on Grant Cardone TV. And really, what we're going to be talking about through that is just best practices. We're going to be bringing in industry experts and just really talking about what's happening in automotive today, and how to get your people motivated, and how to really, at the end of the day, increase sales, because that's really what it's all about. So super excited about that. In addition to that, every single week, we're going to be doing live training on Mondays and Wednesdays at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. So if anybody wants to attend that, again, that'll be broadcasted on YouTube, so you have accessibility to it. And look, to go back to what you talked about in the beginning on this call, with, even if you have somebody that's still like, hey, man, I only believe 25% of what this guy is saying. We got a platform out right now where for $99 a month, you can get trained up on our platform. So if any of the listeners that are interested, please feel free to reach out. I'd be more than happy to talk to you a little bit more about that. But again, I really, really appreciate the time today on the call, John. And I'll help you any way that I can. And anybody who wants to reach out, if you want to provide my information, I'd be happy to help anybody any way that I can.
Yeah, and I think that's big. I know when I started in the industry, I was very hungry, right? I was extremely engaged. I was very hungry to advance my career, and there wasn't a training in place in the dealership that I was in. So I did it myself. I used forums, I used websites, I networked, I reached out to anybody I could and learned from everybody. And that has never stopped, right? Because you just, I don't care who you are or how much you think you know, you can never stop learning. And, understanding the importance that you're going to have the people that are hungry, that are going to go out there and do that and learn on their own, right? And implement some of the stuff that they learn. But as an industry, as a dealership, as a GM, as an owner, a DP, whatever it is that your title may be, I think it's important that you got to understand it's part of your job as well to feed your staff that are hungry. You're going to have the people that are hungry and that are going to eat that up. Then you're going to have the people that are disengaged that you talked about. And they're probably disengaged because they're doing a bad job. If I suck at my job, I'm probably not engaged, right? Because why should I keep doing this if I'm that bad? Well, guess what? Maybe you just need to fix what they're doing. So instead of selling 4 or 5 cars a month, you change their approach, you change their mindset through training, and now they're 10 cars a month. And back to what you say, they get that $200 spiff on the next car that they didn't get before, and it's, wow, okay, now I can support my family. Now I can get the things that I want. I really like this.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Then they become engaged. And I think it's important that we walk away from this podcast understanding that we all agree training is important. But, and I said this on the very first podcast, I'll say this again, is you can have the recipe for success, but you still have to cook. And man, do I love that saying. I've said it multiple times. And why that rings home for me is we all agree training is important. We all agree that, the things that we've talked about on the previous segments, video, answering the phone, all important.
Yeah.
But we listen to this and then we walk away and we don't do anything about it. And if you're going to listen to this podcast, if you want to educate your staff, there are so many avenues to learn from these days. Watching Jeff's video cast that he's going to be doing on Fridays, the YouTube channels, all of that, I highly suggest it. If your salesperson is sitting there at the table and they're just watching YouTube and looking at awesome cat videos, which I still encourage, go ahead and watch your cat videos. But if they're going to be on company time, make it useful. There's plenty of stuff out there for them to better themselves. And when they're ready to take it to the next level, that's when I think you need to get some professional training in there and to do that. So I can't thank everybody enough for listening. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us today. And, as we would always tell you, make sure you subscribe, make sure you tune in, make sure you check us out on YouTube. We're more than blessed to have all the listeners continuously listen into this podcast. And, you feel as you get started with this podcast that you're like, okay, who's going to listen? I just really want to make it beneficial. And then you stop doing the podcast and you quickly realize when you start getting texts and calls like, hey, what's going on? Where's your next episode? Yes. So thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy day and joining us so we can continue to deliver that awesome content.
Absolutely. Likewise. And again, appreciate your guys' time.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.